Hello and welcome back to the Wild Wisdom Wellbeing guest slot with me, Robin Harris of Equenergy Wellbeing Naturally. And today I'm delighted to have with me Judy Gowenlock from JG Nutritional Therapy. So we're going to be looking at food and how that relates to our overall well-being, and particularly focusing on gut health and how that impacts on the health of our whole being. Because Judy and I were just talking before going live about how in our society we quite often have our mind and our body in two separate little boxes, kind of in the way that we look at things. We don't in a lot of things, we don't look at the interrelationship between the two, the interconnectedness between the two, and how they feedback one to the other and impact one to the other. So that's the sort of thing we're going to be looking at this afternoon. So Judy, if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving us a little bit of an introduction to yourself, how you came to be so fascinated with nutrition.
Yeah. So I suppose I've always had an interest in nutrition and cooking from scratch. My mum was I think she was probably of the generation where she left home and she couldn't cook. So she was determined that each of her 3 children could cook 10 recipes. And I was very used to sort of coming home from school and finding a note saying, Judith, please cook tea with the mince that's in the fridge, and making fairly inedible meals. So I've always sort of I've always enjoyed cooking, experimenting with cooking. And then I suppose alongside that, I'd had this interest in complementary therapies. And I kept thinking about studying nutrition, didn't quite take the step. And then alongside that, I was doing a job where I was welfare rights advisor, and I was working with people with addiction issues, mental health issues. And I knew there was a link between their mental health and what they were eating. And, obviously to represent them, I would ask some questions, and quite often people say, I eat ready meals or crisp sandwich. That was another thing that people would eat. And then my mum died, left me some money, and I thought, well, if I don't do this training now, I'm never going to do it. So that's what sort of motivated me to do it. And I suppose it was mainly interest to begin with. But then when I started realizing how stressed I'd been and making changes to my own diet and seeing the changes in my mental well-being, then that was what inspired me to keep going with nutrition and spread the word to other people. So I also see my role as sort of educating people about what to eat. So, yeah.
And I think part of the education is just helping people to understand why and the connection between what you eat and how you feel.
Exactly.
There is a very strong connection between the two.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, I was, when I started studying nutrition, I really knew very little about it. And to give an example, my blood sugar balance was a bit all over the place. So when we eat something sweet or starchy, it breaks down into glucose, which our cells need for energy. And our body likes everything in balance and likes this nice, gentle rise and fall. So for me, I would, before I studied nutrition, I'd have some toast for breakfast. I'd get into work about 10 o'clock. My concentration was going because my blood sugar level had gone up and then gone right down again. So I'd eat the sandwiches I'd made for lunch. So my blood sugar level would go up again. And then by lunchtime, I would be feeling pretty low, pretty anxious, would go out, buy some chocolate to get my blood sugar level back up again. And it would go on through the afternoon. I would, mid-afternoon, I'd be searching around the office trying to find something to eat. And I really didn't connect that my mood was due to, my low mood, my anxiety was due to how I was managing my blood sugar level and ultimately what I was eating. And when I started making changes to my diet, I noticed changes in me. People said I looked different, I appeared different, And that's the message that I want to get through to people.
Yeah, and unfortunately it does have those peaks and troughs. So you get that high, so you feel good and you have energy, and then that quickly wears off because it's sugar rather than a slow release food. It's an instant, and we like instant, don't we? This is our society.
We do.
Like quick fixes. We think things are broken and they need fixing. So how can I fix it as quickly as possible? I feel tired. I feel maybe a bit of brain fog. I have no energy. What will I do? What will give me instant energy? Reach for the chocolate bar, and possibly also the caffeine drink.
I was exactly. I was a real caffeine, I drank loads of tea, and not much water. And I felt, I was cooking from scratch, but really I ate very few vegetables. I didn't eat enough protein, and I considered myself somebody who knew a bit about food, but really I didn't. And I think I find that with clients that people are trying their best, and and there are so many mixed messages around food coming out that people don't know what to eat. And also it's that disassociation between what you eat and how you feel as well.
Yeah, and that's so true. There are many mixed messages, and they change. It's not only that they're conflicting, but that they change over time. Because my mum is very partial to a wee egg. So she used to have eggs quite often because they're protein and they're quite quick often. You boil an egg and she likes her soft boil, so she would boil it for 3 minutes. And then you can scramble them, you can fry them, you can have them in lots of different ways. They're a little protein package, they're so handy. And then there was the whole scare about cholesterol levels. So there are many reasons why one's cholesterol level might be high. It's not just how many eggs you eat.
No.
So that announcement went out, and she was just, what do I do? I can't have my wee egg quite as often as before. And then that message changed, and so it's really difficult.
I mean, I had a similar thing with my dad. He had cardiovascular issues, and he was like, really, no, I can't have, he used to have butter, and then swapped over to one of these awful low fat spreads. And was really, anywhere he went, he would be really insistent, no, I can't have that. I know an educated man who, but I think, and that's very common, all this sort of confusion about what to eat. And messages changing all the time as well. And also I think we're individuals as well, and what suits one person may not suit another. So for me, I really don't get on well with gluten. It just made me feel, I think that also contributed to how I felt, because I just felt like I was under this brain fog all the time. And it affected my digestion and my mood, and I'm much better without it.
And the problem is, what is so easy? Toast, sandwiches.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's really common that people will have gluten throughout the day. They'll have toast for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, and pasta for an evening meal. But for a lot of people, that's not necessarily a good option, and can be quite challenging for them in terms of digestion and inflammation, and also mood. So
And you were saying about your dad being an educated man, but educated people are the people who are reading and listening to these messages. So it's not to say that people are not educated that are making
it's
choices.
not. No, it wasn't.
And like you say, they really are doing the best that they can. They're probably trying desperately to keep up with the latest information in order to eat more healthily. But if the information isn't good, and you don't know where else to look, there's so much. We're overloaded with information now.
There is.
and that's quite stressful in itself. So it's quite a negative kind of downward spiral if you start to get a bit of a rabbit hole you could get sucked into.
Yeah, I think so. And I think sometimes the way that studies are reported in the news can be, sometimes the message that's given out in the news can actually be quite different sometimes from what the study is actually saying. And it probably relates also, isn't it, to that quick fix. We want to hear something that we know we can do. And yeah, so I do think there's starting to be a slow move, and this understanding that we're all very individual, and there's a good diet for there are certain sort of essentials, I think, of a good diet, but I think it varies from person to person, and also from age to age as well, as to what you need, what you enjoy, and yeah, it's really, I sometimes feel a bit, and people are talking about various diets, and oh, this is the best diet for weight loss, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, actually, the best diet is one that is nutrient dense and gives you, everything that you need. So yeah, yes, it's always interesting having conversations with people about nutrition.
I can imagine. And like you were saying, it's very individual, but also where are you in your life? What are you doing? What are your stresses? What is your situation? Because like you were saying about people want simple things. They want things that feel doable, particularly when we're stressed. We don't want to add to that stress by thinking, I have to go out and, buy all of these different ingredients. I don't know how to cook them. I've never cooked them before. So dealing with all of that as well. And before we went live, you were saying about how you keep things simple for people. So maybe if you would say a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I'm a really great believer that, taking small steps can reap big rewards. You don't need to, and actually it's almost really difficult for people, if they're going to do like a complete clear out of their kitchen cupboards. They might do well for a week, but then after that, it usually just drops off. So sometimes with people, it's saying things like, I want you to add one extra vegetable to your daily diet. Sometimes it's about getting people to record the amount of different foodstuffs they eat during a week. Sometimes it's about getting people to be more, focus on their fluid intake. So I think sort of focusing on one thing can really help somebody. And sometimes the changes, I think you mentioned before, Robin, about, we want these quick fixes. But sometimes I always say changes to diet and nutrition, it's a bit, I hate the journey word, but it is a bit of a journey, and it's a bit of a, you're constant. I feel like I'm constantly doing little tweaks here and there and just noticing things. And I think that's the thing with clients. I think doing one simple thing. And then often when I see people again, I tend to use a scoring system. So I get them to score their symptoms at the first appointment. And then we look again at the second appointment and they score them again. And they go, oh, there's not been much change. And I'll say, well, actually, you've gone, your symptoms have gone down from a 4 out of 5 to a 3. So there is a change. And it's sometimes it takes quite a bit of time for things to change. I was listening to somebody the other week, and they were saying, well, really, if somebody's had symptoms for years, it does take time. You could almost say that it could take like a month for each year of things to get better. I'd like to see improvements earlier for somebody, but I think it just does take time. And so people need to be patient, but also celebrate the successes and the things that are starting to change, and those sort of subtle differences. And sometimes I think it's it's not until afterwards that you look back and you think, oh, actually. So for me, with the brain fog thing with gluten, I didn't notice it straight away, but it was probably sort of 3-4 months down the line. I actually thought, oh gosh, yeah, I'm actually seeing things, my focus and my concentration is much sharper than it used to be. So observing things like that. And sometimes the other thing is, I also notice with people is just changes in their appearance. So a client recently, she looked really stressed, really drawn. And then the next time I saw her, there was just this difference in her face. She just and she was much more relaxed. And just much more aware of what she needed to do in terms of changing her diet. And really with her, what I got her doing was just adding in more vegetables and having a more varied diet. And I think the other thing, is saying to people is adding in things or doing swaps rather than taking something away. And that works really well in terms of psychology. Because sometimes if you add in a few more things, you've got less space on your plate for the things that, I would prefer you not to be eating so much of.
Absolutely. And variety, we were talking earlier about, it's so easy to eat an awful lot of gluten. But if you start thinking, well, I could swap, again, not take away, but I could swap my toast for a smoothie or a bowl of porridge.
Yeah.
No gluten there. And I could swap my sandwich for a wrap, which didn't have gluten, or a salad, rice salad, pasta, well, maybe not pasta salad, but, I could swap it out for something like carrot sticks and hummus or something like that, which brings in the vegetable.
Exactly.
And it's colorful, so your food looks better. And part of the whole thing of nutrition, it starts long before we eat it. It's the whole thinking about it, preparation of the food. And if you're having a microwave meal or a ready meal, there isn't a chance for that. You just pop it in, do it for the however long minute, and then you eat it. Your whole digestive system doesn't have a chance to really get going, ready for what it's designed to do.
Yeah, I do quite a bit with clients about talking about mindful eating and sort of getting ready for digestion. So I had one client that while she was preparing meals, she used to have bits of rocket, because bitter food which stimulates your digestion. Equally, I've done things with people like having I've got this artichoke tea. It's incredibly bitter, but having it's almost like having a shot of that in the morning. It's really good for your digestion and stimulating bile production. Sometimes just saying to people, just, like when you've got the food in front of you, it's just taking a few breaths, smelling the food, looking at the food, engaging with it. And you're really right, Robin, that, this microwave culture, there's none of that. So there's no enjoyment of the food, and in that sense of engaging your senses with it. And there's so much research saying these ultra processed food is just not good for our health and well-being.
Well, it loses a lot of its nutrients by the processing, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And also, if you're like cooking a meal for a family or even for yourself, and you're preparing it, you're chopping it, you're adding a herb here, a grate of pepper there, there's something, like you were saying, about engaging with. And there's something about, even I was on a call yesterday, it was a networking group, and Wafa Powell, who does dancing, flavors, belly dancing and Lebanese food, amazing. She was creating something in the background. She was making hummus, and she said, I have all these vegetables to chop. And she also was saying, I am stirring it with love. I am pouring love into the creation of something that I'm then going to feed myself with. So I'm nurturing and nourishing, which is my theme of the month in my membership group this month. Nurturing and nourishing those that I'm cooking for, whether that's myself and my family, whoever that might be. And you know, you're appreciating the color, maybe if it is broccoli or tomatoes or carrots. I love that idea that we eat the rainbow and bring in all of the different nutrients that are part of the color of the food.
Yes, yeah. It's funny you saying that. My younger daughter always says to me, "Oh, Mum, that's one of your ways of, you know, showing love to people is preparing food for them." And yeah, and I find it really, for me, it's quite a meditative process. I find it quite relaxing preparing food and thinking about what I'm going to eat. But you know, I appreciate for other people it's not always the same. So it for me, it's really important to work with the client where they're at, and you know, find out what their lifestyle is like, where they shop, how much time they've got for cooking a meal, whether they're cooking a meal just for themselves, whether they've got other people involved, because that's often very tricky if, you know, they're slightly changing their diet and the family, you know, they're having to bring the family with them. So yeah, it's looking at all those variables and what we can do about them as well. It's I was just saying,
definitely working with what we can work with.
Yeah,
step by step.
yeah, definitely. It's such an interesting subject, food, I think, and in terms of the emotions that it brings out. And I think we have also lost that thing about sitting down and eating a meal together and enjoying a meal together. And we, a lot of people are, you know, perhaps eating in front of a laptop or eating in front of TV, so they're not really digesting well because their focus is elsewhere. And I grew up in a family where we wolfed our food down. So for me, that's something I have to really try and focus on, is actually chewing my food and enjoying my food. And I always think, you know, if I can manage to do some of this, you know, I know other people can as well. And yeah, just with time, things change, and you realize what becomes important to you in your life. I think, eating well, it's a bit like thinking if you had a really expensive car, you would want to, you wouldn't go down to a junkyard to buy the parts. You wouldn't, you would be careful about the fuel that you put in it. And it's the same with our bodies. We need to be looking after our bodies, and thinking carefully about the food that we put into them.
Absolutely. And you were saying earlier about checking in with people, maybe on their second or third visit, and saying, right, what are your symptoms this week? What level are they at compared to when you were here last time? And how sometimes you were also saying about this, the changes can be subtle and we might miss them because we're living with ourselves every minute of every day. And so the changes might just kind of happen and we're not noticing them because they're so small bit by bit, but looking back is when we see that they actually are quite significant. And also you were talking about how we can change in our appearance. So I think it would be also maybe worth taking a before and after photograph, because definitely our skin changes, our hair changes, we start to glow when we're really healthy. My mum, since I became a vegan, she says I look so much healthier. And I hadn't noticed. It was only when she said it, I thought, oh, really? That's really lovely to know. But if you're living in yourself, you maybe don't see. It's when somebody reflects it back to you or whatever, that's when you notice. Or like yourself, you're talking about the brain fog. It's maybe a lot later down the line that something makes you realize. It's not maybe coming straight from yourself. It's like, oh, and suddenly this has been made aware. I've been made aware of this change. So it is good to have something like that when things do feel like, oh, nothing's changing and it's taking so long.
I think, I agree with you, Robin. I think it really, having somebody else say it really makes a difference. The other thing that I sometimes use with people is testing, because I find that can be very sort of motivational for people. So whether that's doing like blood tests, because I can, you know, if somebody comes to see me, I'll take a full case history, and often I find it's the only time they've had to talk about, you know, all their sort of medical history, and often it's quite interesting. Somebody will suddenly say, "Oh, yes, oh, I'd forgotten about that." So then, you know, looking at that afterwards, I like a bit of time to reflect on it. I mean, I can often, you know, I do often give advice at the end of the consult because I've got a good picture. But just having a bit of time to reflect and sort of seeing where imbalances are and what might be the cause of particular symptoms. But using testing can really help, and it can really motivate people. So whether that's a blood test, usually I was thinking about somebody I saw recently, you know, I guessed she would probably be deficient in vitamin D, but she was actually pretty deficient in vitamin D, more so than I thought she would be. The other sort of tests that I use are things like stool tests, which are, you know, really important in seeing if there are imbalances in the gut. And also I like using genetic testing, so that's using a swab. And I found with clients, and also I've done testing on myself, that's been really helpful. And in terms of just motivating and also an explanation. So for an example, for me with anxiety, the genetic testing that I've done has shown that my receptors, which are a bit like the lock for GABA, which is gamma-aminobutyric acid, which is the main sort of calming neurotransmitter, my receptors aren't very receptive to GABA, so I can sometimes feel a bit anxious. And rather than thinking, oh, you know, beating myself up, thinking, well, okay, so that for me indicates I've got a bit more of a need for B6 and zinc, and also in terms of some herbal teas, which are really nice in terms of helping sort of recycling GABA, things like lemon balm tea is really nice. Valerian, not everybody gets on with valerian, but for me it works really well. So I think that can, you know, having something like that you can see and understand can be really motivating in terms of sustaining changes for people. And just how sometimes it's a bit like putting pieces of a jigsaw puzzle together, so it helps with that as well.
And even just the help of understanding when I'm feeling anxious, maybe my body is reacting more than somebody else's would.
Exactly.
So I can just take a breath and then maybe reassess. You know, just give myself that moment of pause, not feel anxiety is rising, there is a problem, you know, going straight to panic, but just, okay, maybe my body's being quite sensitive, I'll take care of myself, but also I'll be mindful and think, no, actually it's okay. I'm okay.
And I think it's understanding your body just makes, you know, it just makes such a big difference. But it's I think until I started studying nutrition, I just didn't have that understanding. And I think the other thing that for me personally I've benefited from is it's led me on to thinking more about myself, because I think nutrition is clearly important, but also thinking about things like exercise, relaxation, sleep, just and about a bit about balance and resilience. You know, they all come into our well-being, but often we can just sort of go through life not really thinking about these things. So I feel it's really important that we just sometimes take a step back and just think about things. Yeah.
And they're so interconnected and interdependent. So, and that's what I love about, I'm like yourself, you know, you start doing this journey, that word, you start doing this stuff for yourself, and you start working with other people, and it helps you to see more for yourself, and then you can share more with other people, and
exactly.
that in itself is reciprocal. Life is just one whole big feedback loop and process, in a sense, isn't it?
Definitely.
I learn more, I have more to share, you teach me more, I have more to share.
Exactly.
And a deeper understanding. And they say, if you want to learn something, teach it. So yeah, and I think these things are also related to our gut, because our stress plays such a huge role and has such an impact on the health and well-being of our gut, which impacts on our digestion. Because if we are stressed, if we're in fight or flight, we're not digesting properly.
No, we're not.
And if we're doing that shoveling thing, then we're not chewing properly. So the food isn't arriving in the stomach sufficiently broken down. So it's then not arriving, all the way down the gut in the state that it's designed, that part of the gut is designed to receive.
Yeah. And I think, the whole thing about it's getting more sort of traction now, I think, about looking after our gut microbes. But, I think there all sorts of different figures, but I think they reckon we're 37.2 trillion cells, but we've got 10 times the amount of microbes. So we're a real sort of balance, between our cells and our microbes. And there's so much evidence relating imbalances in our microbes to ill health. And our microbes are so important in terms of our immunity, protecting our guts, making vitamins, breaking down food. It's a fascinating area, and I think it's growing. People are starting to understand. They're starting to understand about having fermented foods and having a variety of. You talked earlier about eating the rainbow and having this real variety of different vegetables. And people sometimes ask me, well, "What's your top tip?" I usually say, "Eat more vegetables." And actually, there was something in the BMJ, I think it was last year. I think I wrote it down. It was saying that it was a US study saying that over lifetime, if there was a 30% subsidy on fruit and vegetables, it would prevent 1.3 million cardiovascular disease events, and it would save $40 billion. Which is just massive, isn't it, when you think of it like that? I think it's interesting. I think there are some changes happening in medicine around diet, but it's slow. There are some doctors people like Tim Spector, Rupi Jula, Rani Chatterjee, who are talking about lifestyle medicine. But there's still a long way to go, and a lot of doctors don't have the training in nutrition, certainly that I've had, and other nutritional therapists have had, because we're dealing with it all the time and looking at it all the time. So I think
kind of crazy, isn't it, when you think
it is.
that we are what we eat, literally. That's how our cells are made, from the fuel that we give the body.
Yeah.
And there is a quote, apparently it's not actually Hippocrates. Hippocrates was behind the Hippocratic Oath, who, medicine, etc.
Yeah.
But that quote of "let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food."
Right.
Apparently it didn't appear until the 20th century. I don't know, I was looking it up earlier on today.
Right.
But just that concept, and you were talking about the cells in our body and our microbiome. There's a book, and it's called something like 1 in 10, because they say that only 1 in 10 of the cells that we think of as ourselves are actually ours, genetically ours. The rest is the microbiome. So I learned this through my work with animals, particularly horses. So again, something that feeds in and supports our work. But that we aren't feeding our own cells, in effect. We are feeding the microbiome, because it's the microbiome that's doing the digestion. It's breaking down the food and then giving us the components of that food so that we can then go on and use that as fuel. It's not the food that we eat, it's the broken down product and that's the microbiome.
Yeah.
But when we're stressed, that whatever that form of stress might be, it might be kind of an anxiety stress, it might be an environmental stress, so pollutants. So when we have whatever that stress might be, it throws that balance out. So we talk about good gut bacteria and bad gut bacteria, but basically that balance shifts because the bacteria are there, they're on our skin, they're in our gut, and it's the balances.
Yeah, and we've got good and bad living side by side, but you're right. It's when the balance gets out of sync, you know, that can have dramatic impacts upon our health. Yeah, I think it's just fascinating. It's fascinating. And also looking at the oral microbiome as well, because we're swallowing all the time. So that's another area that's really interesting. There's been I don't know what nationality is Stephen Lin. He's a dentist. So he's written a book called The Dental Diet, and he talks a lot about the oral microbiome and looking after that. So it's always something I ask clients. You know, have you had gum disease? You know, how are your teeth? Because people don't think about that.
But disease in our teeth can lead to things like heart attacks.
Yeah.
People don't understand that what's going on in here goes out to the body.
Yes. Yeah.
So we are so disconnected, and our medical system is disconnected. And you were talking about the doctors and that they don't get educated about food and nutrition. And you think, how can that be possible when we are what we eat, and what we eat determines how healthy we can be?
Yeah.
We know that diet is so important. Nutrition. I don't like that word diet because it has that connotation of I'm dieting. But our nutrition and our intake, our food intake, drink intake, hydration is so important for our well-being. How can they not teach this stuff to doctors? And vets are the same. They don't get. So basically what vets and possibly doctors as well, what they get in terms of nutrition comes from the manufacturers of the foods. So it's biased. You know, there's a conflict of interest there. So it's then back on us, and I think that this is part of the whole COVID, the opportunity within the crisis of let's get back to our bodies, let's listen to our bodies and what they need, and to trust ourselves as an individual, to reconnect, to move away from that disconnect back to what is my gut. You were talking earlier before we came live about what do we say? Listen to your gut. So what is your gut telling you? I need to eat this, because our bodies do know when we listen to them.
Definitely.
And that's why we have things like food cravings. Sometimes they can be related to that.
I think it's really interesting, and I think I think COVID has been a time of immense stress for a lot of people, and for some people it's been too much in terms of having to prepare food, but it has also brought people back around food and realizing what they eat, and perhaps also making links between, say, comfort eating as well. I think that's, I've had lots of people say that to me, I've realized, this is what I do when I feel stressed. But this is another thing I could do instead. And I think it's really interesting, isn't it? I went to an event recently in a park where we were planting wildflowers, and I was talking to some children, and they were talking about this little boy was telling me all about growing vegetables at school. And I thought, oh wow, this is great. And I was like, so tell me what you were growing. And I thought, I just thought, this is amazing, because a few years ago there was sort of things in the media saying kids couldn't identify particular vegetables, but he was so excited and telling me about looking after these vegetables and nurturing them, and then being able to eat them. So I think I think things are starting to change, and I think we started realizing that sometimes like the pill for the ill mentality um, isn't a way forward for many people. And also what I find is sometimes people get diagnosed with something chronic, and then they're sort of left and they don't quite know what to do next, and they don't know what to eat, they don't know how to manage that condition. I mean, that's probably a generalization, and I've got a lot of respect. I've worked within the NHS, and they're brilliant at dealing with acute episodes, but I think sometimes those longer chronic conditions, um, they sort of people just get sort of left and are not quite sure how to manage them, and that's really where nutritional advice, good nutritional advice, can really help and support them.
And again, I think it comes back to that, what our doctors taught. And there's so much for them to learn. And I understand that they train for 7+ years already. Where do you fit in the extra stuff? But there are so many diseases that are idiopathic, so doctors don't even know where they come from. But then they're not learning, they're learning the acute care, but we need the care that prevents the acute, the need for the acute. So if we had stress, we're taught about how to deal with stress, how to respond to stress, how to identify stress, then a lot of that problem would be certainly reduced significantly. Plus, if we were taught how to feed ourselves and nurture ourselves well, then I think nurture and nourish ourselves, I think, it would reduce a lot of that end kind of acute pressure.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, there's been research, I think they were saying globally 1 in 5 deaths are attributable to a suboptimal diet. And interventions that they've had with nutrition have just, reduced hospital admissions, they've reduced costs, and there have been benefits in terms of well-being. So, definitely educating people about diet is really, really important. I think.
And if you think about the other chronic. Carry on.
Sorry, I missed what you said. If you think of.
I was just going to say, if you think of the chronic conditions, like how many people have diabetes, how many people have maybe cholesterol or heart disease, how many people have things like fibromyalgia that can be greatly supported by dealing with stress, dealing with nutrition.
Yeah, and I also think people don't, what you were saying earlier about stress, people don't attribute, actually poor nutrition as a stress to our bodies. And people don't see that. They always think of stress in terms of emotional stress. And we do need good stress, but we need to be aware about the long-term impacts of chronic stress and the impacts that has on our body, the impacts that it has in terms of our brain health, in terms of our whole hormonal system as well. And getting people to understand that and understand, there are things that they can do. And I think that's the thing that I feel is also important for my clients is virtually all of them have some level of stress. So it's getting them to think about something that they can incorporate in their day that nourishes them. And again, it probably comes back to that small thing about what somebody's very stressed, just thinking about this client who is really quite a high-powered job, and what I got her to do was just take some time every day with engaging all her senses. So perhaps having a nice bath, perhaps burning some essential oils, listening to some music that she really enjoyed, and then putting on some clothes that could be something like fluffy socks or something that just sort of nourished her. And that was quite a simple intervention, but very effective. Yeah, and there's so much that people can do that can make a difference. And I think sometimes when you're in the middle of that, it's very hard to think of things that you can do, or or they may feel like, oh, that's one more thing. But actually, if you can break it down into small steps, it's very doable, and it can reap really big rewards for people.
Absolutely, and those are the two of the things that I share as well, that break things down into bite size that feel manageable, and just do one, add one step, and then when that feels, oh, that's simple, that's part of my routine now, I'd actually not know how to stop doing it, then add the next step. But also, you were talking there about all of these things that we can add to our day-to-day, which I think it links in with something else you were saying before we came live about empowerment. It gives people back that sense of, I can do this for myself. I can support myself by putting on those fluffy socks, having that bath, listening to music, adding a vegetable, a new vegetable or different vegetable to my diet. But you were talking about the empowerment in relation to flower essences.
Oh, yeah.
Would you tell us a little bit more about them? They absolutely fascinate me. I use them a little bit, but tell us more.
Yeah, so the batch flower remedies, or you can call them the Bach flower remedies, they're interchangeable, neither one or other is. So I sometimes use both pronunciations. So they were invented by Edward Batch, and he started off as a Harley Street doctor, and he sort of became disillusioned with conventional medicine. And he became interested. He was interested in homeopathy, and he was a great lover of nature. So he gave up quite a successful career, and what he noticed was that we need to have a balance between our soul, our emotions, and our physical health, and that when there's this imbalance, it leads to disease. So he designed this system of 38 different remedies, which you can take, and they're all associated with different emotional states. So you can take the remedies on their own, a single remedy. So I've got one here actually. So you could take a single remedy, and if you're having a sort of acute experience, so for example, so elm is a remedy where you're feeling sort of just overwhelmed by your responsibilities. So you could take a couple of drops under your tongue, and you could just keep taking that as and when you needed it, or you could add 2 drops to a glass of water and sip it through the day. But I think the most effective way for probably a longer term condition is to make up like a little bottle like this, which is a mix of 7 different remedies. So there are 38 different remedies. Somebody said it's something like there's 293 million different combinations of remedies that you can take, and they all relate to different emotional states. So my involvement with the remedies really was that I had used Rescue Remedy, which most people know of, which is a composite of 5 different remedies. And I'd used it during childbirth, and I'd used it at times of stress. And then 2019, my father died, and I knew I was my body was quite inflamed. So nutritionally, I was trying a few things, but I thought it's that thing about needing somebody else to have an overview. So I went to see a friend of mine who's a naturopath in Bath, and as part of, so she does a bit of nutritional therapy, a bit of body work, but she also uses the batch flower remedies. So she made me up a blend, and what I noticed, it was again going back to that subtle difference, that it just made a difference in terms of my emotions. And I kept thinking, oh yes, I'd like to study more about the remedies. And so lockdown opened up this opportunity for me to study the remedies in more detail. And I've just really loved finding out about the remedies. And I think they're such a useful adjunct to nutritional therapy because they don't they're simple. I can explain the remedies to somebody, but somebody on their own can equally find out about the remedies. They can put together their own blend. They're effective. They don't interact with other medications. Yes, and I found for me, I suppose the thing is, it's made me think and reflect about my emotions. Um, so, for example, um, if I'm feeling, say, frightened, I would think about, well, am I frightened of a particular thing, or have I just got that feeling that I'm frightened, or am I fearful about somebody else, or do I think that am I in a sort of panic situation, or do I fear losing control? And for each of those different states, there's a different remedy. It might be a mixture of, both, but I found it really helpful for me, and it's something that I interweave into consultations with clients. So when clients book a package with me, I also offer a complimentary batch flower remedy session. But equally, I offer the sessions on their own as a standalone remedy. Yeah, and they're also. I was thinking of you, Robin. They're also they'll use them with plants and animals as well. So I have,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's how you've used them, but I've used them with my cat when she's, during fireworks season when she's been very frightened. I've given her some mimulus and water, and I've used rescue remedy as well.
Yeah, I used to use walnut every time I transplanted something.
Yes.
I'd give it walnut, and it really did help. And one of the horses, when he came to live with me, it was such a big change for him. I gave him Star of Bethlehem for trauma. And walnut. And when I had a bereavement last year, I took Star of Bethlehem as well. And then a friend of mine, she also had a bereavement, so I recommended it to her. So just little bits and pieces that I've picked up, because as you say, there is no contraindication. You can take them and you can just decide for yourself. Because I have a book that you just read through and see, because it's like homeopathy, isn't it? That you go with, like you were saying, the emotions. How am I feeling? What is my go-to response? What is my character, as you would do with homeopathy, to find what's right for me. Very individual, and I love that it's very tailored. It's you can just choose, what am I feeling right now, what is my character, and I can make the blend or take the remedy that is just right, just for me in this moment.
I mean, I think that's really summed it up. That's the power of the remedies. And I think I was, I'm probably somebody I quite like science and seeing things, but with the remedies there isn't that. But actually, for me, they make a big difference, and I know, that's across the world. So part of the thing that I really enjoyed with doing the training was that I was meeting people from India, from America, Israel, all across Europe. So the impact and the love for the remedies is widespread, and I think they are very powerful, and just actually, I think it's also that breaking down and thinking about how you're feeling. That for me, that's the power. And I suppose the other thing I was going to say was there was somebody I put a blend together, and always when I make a blend for somebody, I'll explain the remedies that we've selected, and why. and she said, oh, when I saw that, I got quite emotional because we'd really got the right remedies. And yeah, and if you don't select the right remedies, it's not going to do any harm. And Dr. Batch had that whole thing, which I know people talk about a lot, but we're like an onion, so you treat what's on the outer layer, and once you've dealt with that outer layer, you come to the next layer. Yes, and I think there's also we generally all have a type remedy, but sometimes because of those layers that are built up, it's hard. I'm not quite sure what my type remedy is. I've got some ideas, but it's this journey of getting to know yourself by using the remedies.
Absolutely, and I think that's such an important part of this whole well-being process, that we start to see ourselves, honor ourselves for who we really are, make that reconnection.
Yeah.
And like Dr. Batch was working, his perspective was we need to bring together the soul, the mind and the body and have them working together in harmony and coherence.
Yeah.
That is, to me, is well, it's the well-being journey, it's the well-being process. I don't know that we achieve well-being, but we are going on that discovery.
I think it is a discovery, and I felt that I'm still learning, and that's an exciting thing for me. I've realized, I think, by studying nutrition, that one of the things I really enjoy about it is that I love learning, and just finding out something new. And so it's perpetual learning period and discovering things. And I sort of feel if I'd never taken that step, I'd have missed out on so much. My life would be very different. And I feel I'm on a much better path by having studied nutrition, and all the sort of different branches that's taken me to.
Yeah. And on that note, I would like to say thank you hugely, Judy, for joining me today. It's been such a joy, and I think this is such an important message to share. So thank you very, very much for joining me today.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed talking to you and talking about things I really love talking about. So thank you.
So thank you very much for everybody who's watched today, and for those of you who are watching the replay. If you are, just stick in a hashtag replay. And if this conversation has brought up any questions for you, then just put them in the comments below, and I'm sure that myself or Judy will be able to get back to you. And also just to say that if you're interested in kind of the things we've been talking about reconnecting with yourself, with your body, with how you're feeling, with your gut, with what your instincts are telling you, I'm running a workshop this Sunday, the 1st of August from 10 till 1 here in Equenergy Wellbeing Naturally, based just outside of Abergavenny. So if you'd like to join me, there are still some places left. I'll stick the link for that into the chat as well. And if you're interested in that sort of thing, but you don't live nearby, then just get in touch, because I'm very happy to run it across Zoom as well. So just then to say, have a wonderful weekend and see you again next week. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.